Chicago is about to spend $444 million on a single train station, and when it opens, you may still have to leave the station, walk out onto the sidewalk, and back in to reach the train running directly beneath it. That's not an oversight. Plans to connect these two lines go back to 1981, and the city keeps drawing them and walking away. This is the story of the most expensive train station Chicago has ever built for one stop, and the one thing $500 million still might not buy. State and Lake opened on September 22, 1895, 2 years before the rest of the loop quadrangle was even complete. The station the city demolished in early 2026 was one of the last surviving pieces of 1895 loop architecture still in daily service, still carrying passengers every weekday while the steel around it aged. It was the fifth busiest station in the CTA system, with 2.67 million riders in 2025, serving 5 of the system's 8 lines, brown, green, orange, pink and purple, all on platforms so narrow that at rush hour the crowd pressing in from behind was also pressing in from both sides. Stand on the inner platform at 5:15 on a Tuesday and a brown line train is berthing overhead. The steel groans and the structure moves the way a 130-year-old elevated railway moves when a loaded train enters it. The agent booth sat at the pinch point where the staircase met the paid area, leaving barely enough room to pass if you were carrying a bag. That was not a design quirk. That was a station that had been asking for a rebuild for 4 decades and not getting one. In all of 2025, there was not one elevator in the 5th busiest station in the Chicago transit system. In 2016, CTA ironworkers quietly fixed part of this without anyone announcing it. Working at night and during existing track closures, they widened the east end of the inner platform by 400 square feet and cut train dwell times by up to 20 seconds. They hand-replicated the 1895 ornamental railings to match the originals riveted, the replicas welded, because the new section had to be indistinguishable from what surrounded it. What is happening at State and Lake right now is not Chicago's first attempt to fix this station. It is the 4th attempt over 45 years, and the first one to actually put construction equipment on site. The 3 that came before it tell you why the one being built today costs what it costs, and why it has the problem it still has. 1981. The city of Chicago produced a master plan for the loop elevated rehabilitation. The plan for State and Lake called for building the new station not in the street, but inside the building on the southwest corner, at that time home to the State Lake Theatre and the offices of WLS Television above it. The station would be integrated into that structure, with consolidated fare control, vertical access from inside the building, and a direct connection down to the Lake Randolph subway mezzanine below. The Red Line problem that remains unresolved in 2026 had a documented solution in 1981, and the solution was not to engineer a connection through the street, but to put the station inside the building that already sat on the corner. The plan was deprioritized in favor of higher priority stations like Quincy and Clark Lake, and State and Lake was pushed to a later date. 1998. That September, the CTA announced it would permanently close State and Lake and Madison and Wabash and replace them with a $29 million superstation at Randolph and Wabash, one that would have included a pedway connection to the Red Line a block away. The plan was revised in the early 2000s and then shelved with no replacement for State and Lake. Early 2000s. Architect Daniel P. Coffey designed a clear span truss that would eliminate 6 support columns from the street and slide into place over a single 3-day holiday weekend without shutting down rail service. The structure was engineered, the timeline was specific, and it was shelved without construction. 2017. CDOT announced State and Lake as the next station in the modernization pipeline, following Washington Wabash. A $56.9 million federal grant, plus $5.5 million in design funding got it started, and another $59 million followed in 2019. By 2021, the project held $11 million in design funding and $119 million in construction funding, with a total estimate of $180 million. 4 years after that, the number was $444 million. $75 million in 2017, $180 million in 2021, $444 million in 2026. 6 times the original estimate in 8 years, and the instinct when a number does that is to assume something went wrong. Some of what happened here is legitimate, and some of it requires more explaining. Start with what is legitimate. Utility potholing began in August 2025, months of hand-digging small, precise holes to locate pipes, structures, and unknown objects under a 131-year-old intersection before any machine could touch it. The vaulted sidewalk on State Street had to be reconstructed entirely. The support columns holding the L above the street had to be pulled from a live intersection with trains running overhead. 4 new elevators go in at street corners, 2 serving each platform, so a single failure cannot strand a wheelchair user, plus 2 more down at the Red Line mezzanine. And steel costs what it costs in 2026, tariffs included. There is also a steelman critics of the price tag skip over. This costs what it costs because Chicago refused to shut State Street down for a single day more than necessary. Streets stayed open, trains kept running, sidewalks stayed accessible, and the work happened at night and on weekends, in sequenced phases to keep the city moving around the site. Building inside a live downtown intersection on that timeline is one of the most expensive kinds of infrastructure work there is. And if the city had closed the street for 6 months and rerouted the L for a year, the number would be lower. They chose not to, and that choice has a cost. And the $444 million was never going to pay for service. Capital dollars and operating dollars come from entirely different sources, and the federal money behind this project could not have been redirected into more frequent trains. That is a real frustration, but a different argument about a different pot of money. For scale, the 95th Dan Ryan Red Line terminal rebuilds completed in 2019 cost $280 million. The Green Line Darman Station, which opened in 2024, cost $80 million. State and Lake, at $444 million, is not in a different category because something went wrong. It's in a different category because of what sits underneath it and what the city added to the scope after 2021. State and Lake sits directly above the Lake Station on the Red Line subway, and the two have shared this corner since 1943 when the subway opened. They have never been directly connected inside the paid area, not once in more than 80 years. The transfer between them went through 4 fixes across 3 decades. Stamped paper transfers, then special turnstiles in 1993, a free transfer machine in 1997, then fare cards. Each solved the payment friction without touching the physical problem, because the physical problem was not something a fare policy could fix. To actually get across, you left the paid area, walked down the stairs, out onto the sidewalk, and walked roughly 160 feet to a Red Line entrance. 4 fixes over 30 years for a problem that was never technical. It was a question of land and structure and who owned what. Every video and article about this project draws the same top comment. Some version of, why didn't they just use one of the neighbouring buildings to route a connection down to the Red Line? One version of it, with 164 likes and 18 replies, suggested doing exactly what the 1981 plan did, put the station inside the corner building rather than tunnelling through the street. In 2021, CDOT was asked directly whether a direct connection was possible. The answer was that it was physically not possible. The Red Line mezzanine sits too far south of the elevated tracks for a direct elevator connection. A tunnel linking them would have required acquiring land from the adjacent building owners because the city does not own enough footprint at this intersection to build through. The obstacle was land. Now go back to 1981. That plan solved the land problem by not building in the street at all. It put the station inside the building on the corner, which is precisely the building the city now says it cannot access. That building was rehabbed in 1984 and again between 2005 and 2006, and both times the chance to build the L connection into it passed without anyone acting on it. By the time the city returned with real money, the land the 1981 plan had used to solve this problem had been privately developed twice and was gone. A commenter on YouTube in 2026 independently reinvented a plan the city drew in 1981 and then walked away from twice. The connection was not impossible in 1981. It became impossible. And here is where it stands today. CDOT's Erica Schroeder told Engineering News Record, 2 elevators from outside of the State and Lake Station will take you directly to the Red Line. The project website describes direct ADA access connecting the elevated station and the Lake Red Line subway station. That language sounds like a connection between the two systems. What it actually describes is 2 separate elevator paths, one from the sidewalk up to the elevated platform, one from the sidewalk down to the Red Line, with the street sitting between them. 2 routes from the sidewalk, not a link between the platforms above and below. 5 years of renderings and press releases, and it's still not confirmed in plain language whether a rider can cross between the elevated L and the Red Line without exiting the paid area and re-entering. That is not an oversight in the reporting. That is what the language was written to leave unresolved. Here is what $444 million actually buys at this corner when the new station opens in 2029. The platforms will be roughly double the current width, precast concrete replacing the 130-year-old timber and steel deck. A glass canopy, patterned with a bird-safe ceramic frit, runs the length of the platforms, barrel vaults at both ends opening into a floating dome above State Street. SOM drew the lattice from Chicago's bascule bridges and early skyscrapers, the Hancock, the Sears Tower, structures built to carry enormous loads on as little material as possible. Curved public balconies will frame the Chicago Theatre marquee to the north, and for the first time, the station will be somewhere you can stand rather than something you pass through as fast as you can. The most underreported element is a glass and metal transfer bridge at the west end, connecting the 2 platforms inside the paid area, fixing the 130-year-old problem that has sent riders down to the street and up the other side since 1895. Quietly, inside a project everyone is arguing about for other reasons. And the 1895 canopy posts and railings are being salvaged to frame the fare kiosks, the same ironwork the CTA's crews matched by hand back in 2016. Demolition is complete and the permit was issued April 9. FH Pastion is the general contractor and the project is over 90% federally funded. The weekends of July 18 to 20 and 25 to 27, the L rerouted onto the Wells and Van Buren branches for round-the-clock track and steelwork that can only happen when no trains are running above it. The top comments on nearly every video about this project says some version of the same thing. $500 million and you still walk out of the station to reach the train underneath it. That is not a misunderstanding of the project. 4 plans and 45 years. The 1981 plan put the Red Line connection inside a building. The 1998 plan put it inside a pedway. The 2026 plan put it inside a press release. In December 1966, State and Lake became the first loop station with an escalator. Richard J. Daley attended the opening. 2 escalators, one here, one at State and Van Buren, cost a combined $205,355. In November 1990, the CTA pulled the escalator out and put stairs back. In 2029, 2 escalators returned for the first time in nearly 40 years. 63 years after this became the first loop station to get an escalator, 2 come back. And 134 years after the doors first opened, the station will finally have an elevator. The 1981 plan had the answer, and the city had 2 chances after that to act on it. So here is what this leaves you with. What would you have cut from this project to pay for the connection the 1981 plan already solved? Drop your answer in the comments. Subscribe for more Megabuild stories. See you in the next one.